Hello. Thank you, Professor Peri, for joining us today. Very happy to have you on WBC. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Aman, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you again. Professor Peri is a professor of art history at California State University, Northridge. She teaches courses such as Arts of History, Oceania, and Native America. She received her doctorate degree in African art history from Emory University. One of her published material focuses on Oromo um, identity, dress, and culture in Oromia. It was titled "Modern Dressing Modern Like Our Mothers." We will be discussing about this book today. Professor Peri is with me today. Again, thank you for joining us today, Professor Peri. Can you tell us a little bit about uh, how did you came up with? How did you learn about Oromo? Let's start from that.
Sure, of course,
Yeah.
yes. So, as a undergraduate, I spent time in West Africa. I went to the University of Ghana, and I was finished with my undergraduate degree and figuring out what I wanted to do, and decided to go to graduate school simply because I enjoyed that experience in West Africa so much. And I was at Emory University, thinking I might go back to Ghana. And I met Dr. Mohammed Hassan at Georgia State when I was at Emory, and he encouraged me to take a trip to the Horn of Africa. So in 1996, I did a short trip, and then again in 1998. And that was my first exposure to anything else in Africa, and certainly my first time seeing Oromo culture. What struck me was really the time and energy and resources that women put into the ensemble of things that they wore on their bodies. And so when I finally decided to shift to really focus on that for my research, for my dissertation research, the question really became why? Why would women, particularly women in the eastern part of Ethiopia, who are already poor by Ethiopian standards, why would they spend precious resources on body arts? And so that became the focus of the research study, which began in 1996, and so it's been going on for a while.
The other question, maybe the title is also very attractive title, and it's the book is here, Dressing Modern Like Our Mothers. How did he came up with that title?
So that's a translation from a quote in Afan Oromo of an elder who was trying to explain to me that what she was wearing connected her globally to the Oromo in the diaspora, the Oromo throughout the Horn. So she felt connected and modern. She wanted to be fashionable, but she also was dressing what was in a way that was culturally appropriate, which was based on the rules that she understood from her mother and her grandmother. So she was both looking back and looking forward, and wanting to be modern and progressive, but also wanting to honor her culture and dress in a way that was culturally appropriate.
Thank you. There is an interesting note on your book in on page 28, last paragraph. I'm gonna read it. One Karayu woman at the weekly market scolded me for not photographing her white plastic belt, explaining its importance with the words, quote, "We are modern like our mothers." Explain what happened at that event. Where was that happen?
Yeah, so that happened, I believe it was in 2000. Um, and I was traveling in different regions. So my initial stay when I was there on a Fulbright for a year was among the Afan Kalo. So that's my primary focus. But then I also went to RC, Karayu, Wolo, and some other areas. So Borentu focused, and this woman I was taking photographs. So I began, because I needed to document everything first, I began by just photographing, you know, a whole host of things, including Embarca and, you know, Chale and you know, a whole host of things. And in that process, I was learning the names and so on. And I completely neglected a belt. The belt was plastic. It was white. It didn't seem particularly relevant because it was an item that came from China and available in the market for fairly inexpensively. But I did notice a lot of people were wearing it. So she finally explained to me the significance that this was super, super important for women as a place of binding the stomach. And in doing so, binding, prophesying about land and land distribution and Oromo connection to land. And so I learned it late because I didn't ask the right questions, because I came in with my own perceptions. So it took a while to understand that what I thought didn't matter. It was important to understand what people wanted to tell me and the stories they wanted me to record. So that then became the focus.
Can you also what was like the general goal of this book, and how long did it take you, especially for doing this research?
So the focus of the book is kind of divided into two parts. The first part is more historical. So I began the historical part from about the 1880s to the present. And 1880s was the time period that most people could remember back. So they could talk about what their great-great-grandmothers had told them, the sorts of songs and stories and dress. And so I was looking at arts of the body that includes not just clothing, but also hairstyle, jewelry, facial marking, the ensemble of things with which women decorate their bodies. So supplements, things you're adding to the body, but also modifications, things you do to change your body. Maybe it's cutting your hair. And so I start with the 1880s. There's good documentation. There's some documentation in terms of ethnography as well from the 1880s. An Austrian ethnographer, Philipp Pelitzke, was there and had some photographs, so I could use those photographs. And in those photographs, women were wearing leather. So I knew that collaborated all the stories I was hearing, that women began wearing leather and didn't start adopting textiles till a little bit later. Men were already wearing textiles. So historically, I'm looking at arts of the body, and I let women decide what that meant. So they even wanted to talk about herbs that could be hidden in the hair that would produce a smell. So even smell was considered part of a body art. And then the second part of the book is more anthropological, and it looks at dress within cultural context. So the subtitle of the book is Dress, Identity, and Cultural Practice in Oromia. So the cultural practice part is, you know, these things become meaningful when they're activated on the body. So where are the places where these things become significant for women? And that includes anything from daily trips to the market, to initiation, to marriage, to even death. So looking at where art becomes important in people's lives. And basically, you know, you're asking about the gist of the book. My question is, how do women's body arts communicate? So in terms of nonverbal communication, someone that really understands the language of dress can look at a woman, an Afrankala woman, for example, and they can tell about how old she is, if she has kids, if she's married, her political affiliation, her religious identity, just by looking at what she's wearing without ever speaking to her. So there's an entire language embedded in women's bodies that I argue in the book is different than men's bodies. And that's what I was exploring in my research. In terms of how long, since the initial trip in 96, I started the real dissertation research in 1998. 1999 and 2000 was the Fulbright year. And then I made trips back, a longer trip in 2010, and then I'll be going back in the spring. So, yeah.
Thank you. I will actually raise some of the, those art like Sabatak, Arma, uh, Harry, tattoos, and so many other things. But what is like the significance of Oromo art, especially for in the fashion world?
Oh my gosh, the fashion world is just, it's exploded, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not a expert, but I'm always on social media because it's amazing what Oromo fashion designers are doing now, both in Ethiopia and in the diaspora. In Oromia, there are many up and coming designers. When I go in the spring, I'll visit one in Shashamene. But then even in Minneapolis, also in Canada and Edmonton and places. So it's becoming quite prolific, and I'm just amazed at what's happening there. So what I'm seeing is just kind of this thirst, this real hunger, this real interest in identifying with and expressing one's culture through the body, and that's it's fashion, but it's also there's a real pride and honor in expressing Oromo identity today.
I saw actually I was doing a little bit of research while I was preparing for this program. You was also in Minneapolis. Was like a woman, Oromo woman from Eastern Oromia, dressed with red, green, and beautiful colored clothes and Oromo arts. Tell us about that event. And I
So
saw you also holding a basket on your head, dressed as a yellow
right.
arma. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so the woman next to me had brought the basket and she'd put it on my head. So I was so delighted and honored to be invited by the Eastern Oromia Women's Association in Minneapolis to come out a couple weeks ago. So these were women that I didn't know, I didn't have any contact with, but they had decided to read my book in their book club, and they invited me to come. And I was expecting perhaps, I'm thinking a book club, maybe someone's living room with 10, 12 people and some cake, right? And it was like a wedding. It was a banquet hall filled with people, and all the women came dressed. It was a wonderful event. I was concerned because the Hachalo event was right before, and I thought, well, no one's going to come to my event, and they did. They went from both to the other, and even Hachalo's widow and Dr. Awal came as well. So it was a great honor. I was able to speak. I was able to meet with people and really see for the first time the rich things I was seeing on social media in terms of dress today, the way people are embracing it. It was quite remarkable. Just a beautiful turnout.
Your book is mainly focused on Eastern Oromia, particularly one Afrankalo woman. You also touched about Wollo, Arsi, and the Barentuma Plain. W- Tell us, why did you do that?
Right. So in terms of the Great Oromo Confederacy, I decided to focus on the Barentu side because there was enough similarity in terms of dress styles, the meanings behind dress, and historical experience. I'm not an expert in any of those regions, but I'm just looking to see some of the common threads there. And one of the things I was trying to drive home in my presentation in Minneapolis, I was invited to speak, actually, to talk to the youth, to talk to young people about some of these traditions that they really hadn't grown up with or weren't as familiar with. And so it was trying to stress the idea that these body art practices aren't just superficial. And sometimes we think of fashion as just kind of fleeting and this kind of waste culture, but it's not. In this case, this stuff is really significant in terms of identity. And at different historical moments, as we all know, within Ethiopia, Oromo culture was suppressed, Oromo language, Oromo history was not allowed to be told. And so it became, women's bodies became the markers for this cultural expression. They were the carriers of a lot of this knowledge. And a lot of that knowledge was in tangible forms. So just like we might use a rosary if we're Catholic, or beads if we're Muslim, right? It's the tactile, it's the physical thing that allows you to remember and to bring up those memories from your ancestors.
The other question is, maybe, is there any linkage between this Barentuma women in the way they dress, culture, identities, between Wollo and Afrancallo, between Afrancallo and Arsi, between Arsi and Wollo?
Yes, yeah. And so the second half of the book looks at one category is just hairstyle. So hairstyle among those groups, and how we differentiate in the life cycle, different age sets, different times in life, just by how the hair is treated. The way in which women, basically in life cycle rituals. So things like, marriage, super important time when that dress set changes, and there's similarity among those groups. It's not necessarily the same materials, but the significance and the stories behind it is similar.
I saw your photo sitting with a bagada and holding Sinke. Tell us about that event. Where did that photo was taken, and what happened? Can you tell?
That was with Bansamo Miso, who we lost a few years ago. And that was a trip I did in 2010. And I had no desire to dress in RC dress, but the women that came who I was interviewing, she said, you really need to experience it. You need to feel the weight of it and what it takes to even put it on. And so I did. I got to try what it felt like to dress like an RC woman. So while I was there, I was doing research, of course, but there was inauguration of a hospital in Shashamene. And so just from that compound, we didn't go far to the opening of this hospital, where a lot of women came holding the sike or sinke stick. Where I worked among the Afankalo, they don't use sinke or sike. So unlike, among the Karayu and others, we don't see it there. And so I didn't know that much about it. So I was asking questions about it. In the meantime, I've been invited to become part of the board of the Sinke Institute, which Kue Kumsa started. And so we are a host of scholars and activists who are interested in Sike, not just for the stick for Oromo, but as a model of conflict resolution that can be useful throughout the world. So we have scholars doing work in Peru and Vietnam and other places in the world who are embracing this model. And we actually have our first interns now who are with us, who are learning about Sinke and sort of the idea of paying that back. So while the active practice doesn't seem to be as vibrant as it used to be, in fact, that's what I'm going to be looking for when I go in spring. The model, the idea behind it is so significant and important. The idea that if a woman is in trouble, if she's threatened for any reason, she can grab her stick, leave her home, ululate, and all the women in her community will stop what they're doing and come to her aid. Like, what an amazing system that is. We have nothing like that, in Euro-American culture. And then to come together and gather and wait for the elders to hear, to listen to what has happened, to hear their complaint and to make a judgment, to help those women. So I see it as a particularly strong institution. Again, it's not one that was practiced where I was doing research, but I first got to see women with their sticks coming together when I was there in Shashamene.
Interesting. Tell us, what did you feel when you dressed that dress? Is there any feelings? What did you felt?
It felt heavy. It was constricting. So I felt the tightness around my forehead. I felt the heaviness, the weight of the leather there. And then walking, I noticed that it made a sound, right? And so it alerts people that you're coming. You can hear a woman before you actually see her. So
Interesting. Let's talk about Sabata. What is the significance of Sabata, especially in passing history of art from generation to generation? You know, you also associate the Sabata with land division among the Berentuma Oromo. Can you talk about that?
yes, so the Sabata, which you can kind of see Nyadesa's painting over my other shoulder, which became the cover of the book. So this is an Oromo singer. She's wearing sadeta with a sabata, almost hidden, but you can see a little bit of it there. So because it was hidden, again, it wasn't something I paid a lot of attention to at first. But when I started to ask questions, I realized it was incredibly significant. So the sabata, which is an imported textile. It's loom woven, at least today it's imported, encircles a woman's waist and is something that is gifted to her, put on her at her wedding by her mother. And so one of the stories that elders told was about Haromaitu, the great Oromo mother, sitting down and taking the sabata and encircling her waist. And with each tie, she would prophecy or give land, particular areas of land, to her sons. And so one of those, one of those great-great-grandchildren inherited then the land of the Afran Kalo. And so when she encircled her waist and the mother of Afran Kalo gave land to Afran Kalo, to the four sons of Kalo.
Yeah, I can actually remind you some of the land is from your book on page.
Yes, please. Good.
Page 29. You've written there was Ayameto began to wind a sabata around her waist 5 times. She encouraged the young woman from the area to take a piece of long clothes and follow suit. As she encircled her waist, Ayameto prophesied the regional distribution of land for her grandson with each wrap of the clothes. Humbanna should have the land near Kumbi. Kumbi is a district in eastern Oromia. Marawa should have the region from Gaugao to Anchal. Tumuga should have land, should have Didaa in the Bale. Karayu should have the area of Hadama in Harsedi. Harsedi is near Bishoftu. Kallo should have the land from Jarjar to Balal.
Right. So we have Kalo's land, and then Kalo's distributed into where the region where I was actually working. And so that may or may not, that song, that chant may or may not be used anymore today, but the sort of ritually encircling and tying is a metaphor for land and for one's connection to land and ownership of land. So while many people are today displaced and no longer have those ancestral lands anymore, they symbolically carry it through that wrapping motion at the waist in wearing the sabata. The sabata also is the binding of the stomach is something I talk about. Sabata is talked about as a rainbow. There's a lot of symbolism with it in terms of the belly and fecundity and after marriage, becoming fertile, having children.
Can you talk about the significance of sabata for fashion designers? Let's associate with the modern world of the fashion.
Yeah, I can't say a lot other than I'm seeing it. So it is obviously still important. There's still something there that's significant that ties back to this sense of Oromo identity. So it's being, it's still being it's an important marker that's still used in the fashion industry today.
Can you also talk about, the invasion? You in your book on page 55, I can remind you some of the points. You also indicate that the invasion of Menelik in 1918s has changed the woman's dress style. Can you talk about that?
So yes, in the 1890s, yes, the dress style, we so what's interesting is that while I said there are very prescribed codes of how you dress, in other words, dressing like our mothers, there are times historically where dress shifts and changes. So women's dress, first and foremost, is associated with peace. So women come, they are a symbol of peace. Their body art is a symbol of peace. And so the sareta that they're wearing, the hairnet that they're wearing are symbols of their ability to be peacemakers, peacekeepers. At certain times, men could adopt that dress. So we see among the Gabra, for example, older men will wear women's dress to promote peace at certain times. We find that among Oromo too. During the battle with Menelik, we see the opposite, where women start wearing things associated with men and warfare, particularly the hari. So the hari being a bullet holder, a reed waist piece that originally was a belt, but became something that could then carry bullets. And women, as we know, during Anali, the Battle of Anali, fought alongside men. And in the process, if they were captured, would have a breast severed or a hand severed. And so we have that, the Anali memorial, which I actually haven't seen in person, but I hope to go in February of next year. And it's super significant because in addition to arts of the body, I have a chapter just on the rules that govern the female body. So, for example, in Guma, if a woman's breast is severed, or a hand, or an eye, or something, there's a whole oral history, a whole narrative of governing laws that apply. So yes, in the case of Anali, we have a situation in which women use men's dress to indicate their shift from being peacekeepers to actually defending Oromo land, Oromo life.
Interesting. You also indicated on page 57 about Anole Maritias Memorial Monument. Can you talk about that too? I believe you have visited that as well.
No. So I was just saying that I want to visit it. The severed breast and the hand, that martyrs memorial. I hope to see in February. I have not yet visited it. So it wasn't there when I was doing my field work in that region. It hadn't been built yet. So not only do I want to see it, but I want to see people's reaction to it. Is it at a place where people pilgrimage to? What do they do when they're there? It's a really, I think, probably the most impactful monument I've ever seen. It is startling to see that severed breast in that hand. And so I wonder how people feel about it, and I would like to visit it.
Okay. Can you talk about the role of women in Geda system?
Yeah, so Gada or Rabadori, where I was doing research, was no longer practiced. And what we find in Guji and other areas, more Barana areas, is that when Gada was outlawed, women to some extent would practice Gada in modified forms, particularly in things like spirit possession. So in possession, they would take on the spirit of Gada or the Gada roles, and that could be played out to some extent. Women in Rabadori, so women were obviously the wives, the sisters. They played a role, sort of in a secondhand role in that sense. But where they really were central was with the Sike. And so the CK wasn't just there for conflict resolution, it was also there for women's voices to be heard. And we still see this among the Karayu, where women can bring their sticks into meetings or gatherings to be heard. They can also sit down with all their sticks, touching, holding onto their sticks, and that makes a very profound statement. So these small actions, I think, play into the role that women once held when Gada was strong. And so one of the questions is, Gada as an institution, a lot of intellectuals are talking about it as a platform of sort of how to unify the Oromo people, different ideologies and religions and so on. You still have Gada, right? So what role would women play there? It's a very interesting question. How would women be included in that when women didn't have the same age grade as men did?
So what is especially the role of Sinke or women, as you talk especially about Sabata in conflict resolution in the Gada system?
Right. So again, this was not something that people remembered where I was doing research. So the only information I have is really from RC area and a little bit on Karayu. And so my understanding is that women could participate in decision-making. They could come and sit under Oda with men and have a voice with their stick. Their stick was indicative of their ability of their wisdom, you might say, of their inherent wisdom. And of course, you could look at a stick and how much leather was tied to the top of it would suggest how much conflict resolution a woman participated in, if in fact it involved the slaughtering of an animal and the distribution of meat. So there's a visual connection with the leather tied onto it. I think that, the leather is important. There's a quote in the book I might like to read later that gets at this idea. So while what I understand is that CK allowed women to participate, it identified them as having knowledge and wisdom. And while they might not actually speak, just having the stick there would speak for them. It would say volumes about who they were and their connection to community.
Some people criticize that women, they do not have roles in the Gada system. What would you respond? What's your response would be to that?
Yeah, and I wish I was a Gada scholar. It's just not an area where I was doing research where it was as strong. I would say that women, from what I'm hearing from people, sort of anecdotally have told me, is that women did participate. They had strong influence, again, as wives and as mothers in terms of what was happening in Gada practice. They were also necessary for rituals to take place. So from men's passage from one age grade to another, women were actively involved in helping that transition and guiding that transition. Women's stories, women's songs, women's dances were also part of Gada practice.
Interesting. Can you also talk about Gufta during engagement and marriage? What is Gufta?
So Gufta is the hairstyle that is typical of a married woman that she receives on her wedding. In the photo you can see, in the cover of the book you can see it. She is wearing two tufts or two balls called hamasha that is made with this net hairpiece. And as she ages, these balls, which are very, very puffy, very big initially, begin to grow, right? They begin to, her hair will thin as she ages. So they're also a way of telling a woman's age if her hamasha is very low and sparse. She's probably an older woman. But gufta is something that all women receive at marriage. Women I work with are Muslim. They will wear gufta and they will just put a fota, a cloth over their heads. But the gufta is significant and is almost like a second skin. Women won't take it off except to clean their hair.
Can you also talk about a little bit? You have already talked about Hari. Can you talk about Hari a little bit?
Hari in terms of
in terms of war, in terms of art, in terms of fashion.
Right. I don't know. I'm not sure to what extent I haven't necessarily seen it in fashion. It may be there. I'm certainly not an expert on what's happening now. But do you have that quote from the poem on Hari? It's just 4 lines. I don't remember it by heart, but I can probably find it.
I think about Hari, it was page 56. Let me go to page 56.
The Hari of today is the Sonara of something. That's what I'm remembering.
It was a very interesting topic about Hari too. I never knew about Hari. Something new I learned from your book.
So here it is. In the springtime, the bali leaves blossoms. So how's the Sonara faring, having replaced the Hari? So women were taking off their sabata and putting on the Hari. And in the book, I have a picture of the Sonara belt. And the Sonara is the contemporary, version of the bullet holder that men would wear, that women would, it's kind of an icon for modern warfare, using guns.
Yeah. Can you also talk about? I'm just jumping from one point to another. Can you also talk about Rabadori? You a little bit talked about Rabadori, the role of women in Gada.
Rabadori is the name for Gada among the Afran Kalo. So Rabadori is just another name for that system of Gada. Yeah.
Especially for kids, Oromo kids who was born and grew up in the diaspora in different parts of the world. What's your message, especially after you went to Oromia, studied about the Barentuma Oromo woman, the dressing style, about identity and culture? What messages do you want to convey for them, especially for those who do not know or understand much about the Oromo culture, identity, history, background, and everything?
By and large, Oromo culture is still today an oral society where the most important information is passed from one person to another. I think that for many people, the stories, the sense of identity, the connections to the past live in tangible forms, in creative expressions and in tangible forms like art. So as identity is threatened, as people are displaced, as more and more people lose access to land, they can't make baskets anymore, for example. They just don't have the resources and time. They're on the move. It's a very challenging time for people. And, some might say, well, dress is the least important thing at times of stress. But I would say it's actually the opposite. I think when your identity is threatened, it's when you need to understand it and hold on to it most of all, because it's where your strength is. Your strength is in your community. It's in the knowledge you learn from ancestors. It's in the wisdom you embody. And I think a lot of this is based on women as carriers of culture. So when I was in Oromia and I talked with people, they were first and foremost so grateful that someone was interested, that someone cared, that someone was going to write it down. And my only regret is that it took me so long to write this book. It took a long, long time. It should have come out a long time ago, and I just kept, adding to it, got busy, life things happen. It's finally done. My next project will be to make a film, which I think will be even more accessible, particularly to the youth. But it was important for them to tell me their stories and have those stories recorded, because their fear was if it wasn't recorded, it would be lost. And so what I've tried to do is accurately as I could as an outsider, record those stories so that they are available. The way in which I tell those stories is through art, because I'm an art historian, arts of the body, and that seemed to be also what was important to women in the communities that I worked. So I'm using art, but it's a lens. It's kind of like a frame for all of these important messages that people want to be able to express and communicate. So I think for Oromo youth, these cultural expressions are there for them if they're interested, and there's this is just a drop in the bucket. There's so much more to learn and so much more to understand and document and bring to light. So many incredibly talented, knowledgeable people that are just waiting, and so there's a lot of opportunity as well. I know a lot of Oromo in the diaspora encourage their children to be doctors and lawyers and maybe journalists, but to go into fields like anthropology, art history, linguistics, to really begin to document these things, I think is important. So maybe it might inspire that, right? Maybe someone that wants to even go into fashion would find value in learning about the backgrounds of this dress.
Yeah, I've lived in other, but I never knew like what is written in this book. I've learned it. I'm still reading it. I started 3 days ago. I haven't finished it. I had so many very, very important book. Still lots to learn. Can you talk about like the significance of this book in especially connecting to Oromo to the world?
Right. So let me go back for a second to just African studies. So African art history, right? African art history, by and large, says very little. And if you look at a textbook, for example, there's very little written about even the horn in general. Nothing about the Oromo. If you look at Ethiopian studies, right, what does it include? Mostly, if we're going to look at art, it's art and architecture of the Orthodox Christian communities. And so almost nothing has been written about Oromo arts, and Oromo arts, including carvings that men do, headdress, a lot of rich materials beyond dress that have not been studied. And so the few articles that I've published and now the book are sort of the first, I think, to address Oromo art specifically. This is helpful for my colleagues, so others that are in my field will start to understand that the Oromo should be brought into the conversation about aesthetics, about dress, about identity. And my hope, because it's available only through Amazon and Africa World Press, that I can have it translated into Afran Oromo and then publish it in Ethiopia so that more people have access to it. That would be my hope, because it's just a starting point. It's the first, but there's hopefully many to follow.
Yeah, I wish I could have asked you so many questions. Time is limited us. My last question is, how do you recall your stay in Oromia, specifically in Harar? What would you look like?
How was my stay there?
Yeah, in
Okay,
Harar.
yeah. So I lived just outside the wall. I rented a room in a home there and lived there for about 8 months and then traveled. So I worked with the Oromo Bureau of Culture and Information. And so with representatives, I always needed a representative in order to travel. I would go to places like Babile and Fedis. And then as I would meet people who were knowledgeable, they would be invited also to my home for interviews. So most days I had people coming, we would have lunch together, we would sit and chit chat and smoke shisha afterwards and record late into the night. My research associate, Bakalcha Yaya, who now lives in England, was instrumental. This book is just as much his as mine in terms of helping me with the translation and asking the right questions. He could very quickly assess what kind of knowledge a person had and how they would be helpful in terms of gathering materials. Remember that there was no history of this region that had been done before, so I had to just take oral histories first before I even could talk too much about dress. And so it was a very, I loved living in Harar. It was absolutely wonderful. The food, the climate, the landscape was beautiful. And the only thing is that when I was there, the road was not good, right? So it took 8 hours to get there, from 6 to 8 hours from Addis on those bumpy roads. Now it's very, very fast, right? So then also the fact that, it's an important trade center. So there are also Argoba, Harari, and Somali women. So I also did research in those communities to understand, what the connection was to Oromo.
Any funny experience on chat events when people play chat?
Well, it's, I think, the best study drug out there, right? It allows you to think so clearly and work so well. So you can work late into the night. For farmers in the region, obviously, it's an appetite suppressant, so it gets them going in the morning, especially if there isn't a lot of food. I was disappointed that Harold Marcus and I don't know who else, other scholars protested against it being legal in the United States, so it's now illegal. Is that true in Canada too? I don't know.
Yeah, it's illegal in Canada too.
Yeah, so what you're getting is not good and old and all of that. But I think, especially for Oromo farmers, it would be good if there was more of an international ability to sell internationally their product. But I think as a narcotic, it's it's you have to chew a lot for many years before there's even an adverse effect physically. So in that sense, it seems like I don't know. I don't want to say it's a healthy pastime, but it certainly is better than drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, well, final thought. If you have final thought, I'll give a chance. If people are interested to buy your books, how can they reach out to you, or where they can find your book?
Yes, the book is available on Amazon. It's also available through Africa World Press or Red Sea Press, the publisher. Again, I'd like to eventually find someone that would help me translate it so that it could be available in Oromia as well. I plan to go, I have a sabbatical to go in February, March, and my hope is to record CK. So I'd like to learn more about that practice, who's still doing it and where in Oromia in the spring. So that will also be something, hopefully by the end of next year, available for everyone, and that'll be free and accessible.
Thank you, Professor Peri. I really appreciate for taking your time to talk about your book, Dressing Modern, like our mother's dress identity, cultural practice in Oromia. Thank you again.
Thank you.